what I've been really discovering is how primal and primary the Sumerian civilization was. I mentioned the flood myth, and so we were finding these clay tablets in the late 19th century and beginning to translate them into the 20th century, and suddenly reading, oh my God, they got in a boat and took their animals with them when the floodwaters came, and then after 40 days and 40 nights, the floodwaters receded, and all of this kind of stuff is right there in the tablets, and so all of these ideas were coming through it.
What we call today contemporaneous accounts.
Yeah.
Tuesday, January 7th. How you doing, Josh?
I am doing well.
Do you have a story to tell me?
I do. As you know, I am ADHD and always looking for the next sort of shiny thing to look at. And one of my general interests is the Bronze Age. And I know I've talked about Egypt and its importance to humans in Africa and its relationship to sort of beginning civilization. But there's a place that's even older, and that's Sumer. And I really think that they're at the center of the sort of flow of religion from antiquity to the present.
Sumer, as in the Sumerian
civilization. Sumerian civilization. The Sumerian civilization was already 1,800 years old when the Great Pyramid at Giza was finished.
So the Sumerians, you're saying, predated mature Egyptian civilization by over 1,500 years.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so the flood myth in the Old Testament comes from the Babylonian flood myth. The Babylonians got it from the Sumerians.
So they were actually the first to have the flood myth.
They were the first. Huh. Their city is literally called Ur. The first, that you get the whatever that
where
is.
Where are we? Where is
Mesopotamia? This? So we're literally what the Greeks called middle Potamos, the rivers. So the Euphrates and the Tigris. Okay. So it's mostly in Iraq, but it's also into Syria, goes up into Turkey. It's an entire region, and they had a civilization that lasted from roughly, say, 4,500 years ago to about 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
No. 4,000. So it ended 4,000 years ago. So it started around 2,500 years before that. So 6,500 years ago till about 4,000 years ago is when their civilization went. It was roughly ending at the beginning of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, which were 4,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So these are the people really spanning from the end of the Neolithic, when you get these ritual centers in Turkey, and wheat has been developed for the first time. We now think that we used to think it was farming led to a surplus, which caused priests and religion to form, essentially.
Right.
But it's the other way around, is that the ritual centers in Turkey depleted the resources surrounding them because people really liked to go there, and they harvested the local indigenous wild grains. They'd started, growing the seeds that they'd kept from the good ones before, and then keeping on harvesting that, eat all the animals in the area, and suddenly your circle of stones where you do your beer drinking has become a center of population, and it needs to be supported. And so agriculture was developed to support this centers of population, not the other way around, which is really interesting. And so then these gave rise to the later city-states of Sumer. So there was a movement from the sort of northern areas of Anatolia down into the Mesopotamia area, and bringing with them. So the earlier ones in Turkey had domesticated the aurochs and made oxen. They domesticated goats.
I'm sorry, the aurochs?
The aurochs, the thing in the cave paintings, the original ox.
I've never heard that before. That's a new one to me.
Oh yeah,
Aurochs,
yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The Nazis tried to recreate them and made these really evil cows called the heck cow. People call them Nazi murder cows. But they because they thought it would be really cool for like super white people to wrestle cows for whatever reason. But
Cool.
anyway, yeah, they just made this horrible thing. Which what you'd figure they would
Yeah.
do. But anyway, yeah, this thing was made extinct finally around just a few hundred years ago. But Indian versions and the European versions came together in Sumeria. And the original Indian aurochs went extinct right about the time that Sumeria was existing. So anyway, you've got animal husbandry, you have farming. They move down into this region between the rivers. It's very, very fertile, but has problems with water. So they develop canals, and they put the cities on the canals. And so now you have really the beginnings of real civilization, where you have writing down what you're doing. They've got a list of the kings. They know who served when.
Is there a record of this essentially urban planning having been actual urban planning? Was this planned out, or did this happen as sprawl? Do we know?
A little of both of these things. So that when you dig the canal, you purposely put the city next to the canal. Right. Other times, it starts off with you move next to a mountain, you build terraces on the mountain, and you build your little walled city at the bottom, and you build a canal next to your walled city so that it gets to the next place. Right. But if you look at them, there's more or less a line of Sumerian cities running right between the two rivers because it's a great place to be.
Right.
And controlling the water along these canals means you control your little spot, and then you have trade up and down between them, and so it worked really, really well.
Yeah.
Now it looks like desert, but it was at the time it was a very lush area, and
fertile valley.
They were able to produce a lot and had a continuous civilization for over 2,000 years, and
longer than us.
It disappeared entirely. We had no idea they existed until the mid-19th century. People started looking for the biblical cities because they'd gotten the idea that the way you could look for Troy, another Bronze Age city, you could go looking for the city of Nebuchadnezzar. You could go looking for these places named in the Bible and the kings named in the Bible, and it turns out they actually existed. So for a long time, all of this archaeology was being done in the name of biblical archaeology. And it was looking for the biblical cities, and they were finding them
to prove that it was true.
Yes,
that's
more or less like how Troy was found, and may or may not be Troy, but it's probably something like Troy, very close anyway, and therefore proved Homer, whatever that means.
Okay.
Yeah, but these are things where you can say, I'm looking at an account, and it has some relation to history, and we can actually find some of these things.
Yeah.
That's part of what I've been really discovering is how primal and primary the Sumerian civilization was. I mentioned the flood myth, and so we were finding these clay tablets in the late 19th century and beginning to translate them into the 20th century, and suddenly reading, oh my God, they got in a boat and took their animals with them when the floodwaters came, and then after 40 days and 40 nights, the floodwaters receded, and all of this kind of stuff is right there in the tablets, and so all of these ideas were coming through it.
What we call today contemporaneous accounts.
Yeah, more or less. But I'm realizing how deep these images go. So, for example, one of the classic Sumerian deities, later Assyrian, Babylonian, something called the Lamassu. The Lamassu is sort of like a bull with wings, but maybe lion's feet, and it has a man's head with a beard, and is a protective deity, some magical, but you've often seen it at the doorway to something. So at the gates of Ur had two Lamassu right in front of it, protecting it. So the protective deities, these things to protect the city. And that same image originally was a female, became male later on, but so the same thing, clean-shaven, flowing hair, was the Sumerian version of it. Sumerians often were clean-shaven anyway, so it's hard to tell were they really female or not. But later accounts described them as female. I was just reading about the night journey of Muhammad. And Muhammad got on his horse Barak and he flew to the edge of, the edge. He flew to the edge where there was a tree marking the place between angels can't go past the tree on one side and the domain of reality can't go past the tree on the other side. But this place is the Dome of the Rock. It's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And that's why the Al-Aqsa Mosque is second in holiness to Mecca. And if you look at the horse Barak, in particularly older depictions, you'll see Muhammad has a veil, but Barak is fully rendered, and Barak is a horse with wings, sometimes two sets of wings, and a human face, woman's hair, clean shaven, long hair. And if you look at the oldest depictions, it's not a horse's tail; it's a bull's tail. So basically, Muhammad is essentially riding a lamassu, and so these images have been taken into these stories, and you see them all over the place. And I was realizing it because I was having a hard time remembering the name of the Sumerian sun god, because I kept confusing it with words that I'd heard people using in Hebrew, and then I realized, oh, it's the same word. So Shamash is the sun god, and he's the ruler of the gods. He's sort of the Zeus character, but he's a sun god.
Ra.
He's Ra, very much so. And so Shamash is a human-ish looking person with maybe some extra attributes and a beard and a robe and or a skirt, and often above him, you'll see this eagle, and the eagle will sometimes have the sun disk in the center of the eagle's wings,
yes,
but it's an eagle above him. So he has his representation as the eagle or the sun, and also his representation as the god, as a personified god, and then sometimes his personification as a human, as the ruler of a city. And so this became the origin, essentially, of the Trinity. But so you have the body version, you have the god who looks like a human, and then you have this bird that flies between them. In later Christian stuff, it's a dove, but originally it was an eagle. And Shamash is the same as the candle that is used to light the menorah, the shamash, and
the bearer of the flame.
The bearer of the flame, and apparently, it means servant, but I suspect the Hebrew for son, Shemesh, and the Hebrew for servant, Shamash, are related, given that Hebrew didn't always have vowels in it. And the word for the sun king of the Sumerians also wouldn't have had vowels in it. So all of these are a little bit arbitrary sounds.
The Sumerians also did not use vowels?
Not in the same way, not in their writing.
Where were the Jews at the time of the Sumerian civilization?
They didn't exist yet. So they
didn't exist yet, because I thought they were already ancient in the time of Egypt.
So here's the thing. This is sort of what I'm trying to get at. This is the ancestors of those people who were the shepherd kings. The shepherd kings are the Sumerians. The shepherd kings that was their source of power. It's where we get the idea of the good shepherd, or the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. All of these things are Sumerian concepts, and they are so Abraham and sacrificing his son, and his son's a sheep, but it's actually a goat. All of this kind of stuff. This is very Sumerian. Substituting the goat for the human, because the goat is a human, and the scapegoat. All of these things are ideas.
Scapegoat is an idea that comes from Sumer.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was these were later versions of them, but you dress your goat up and give it all its bad things, and then you kill it, and you've killed the bad thing. So the goats and the all the bulls, all these things were half human, half person, because they were the same. You were a bull, and your king was a bull, and you were the sheep, and the shepherd was the good one. And if your king was a bull, that was bad. But if your king was a shepherd, that was good. But you still were the flock. All of these things, these are concepts coming out of Sumer, and then basically twice, if you're just asking about the Jewish people. So you had people who probably were peripheral to this. So they weren't in the cities. They would have been the shepherds outside the cities, but part of that world, coming from that world, using that language.
My father was a wandering Aramean.
Something like that. Yeah. So they were speaking the same words. And then they went to Egypt, speaking a different. The Egyptians speaking different. So the Egyptians were not calling their son Shamash. That was Sumerian. So it was people with that language world.
There had to be mixing of the Sumerians and the Jews, the people who became the Jews. There had to be.
They have the same language. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Proto-Hebrew or whatever was coming through these people. So I'm not saying that they were in Mesopotamia. They were in the region outside of it, but next to it. So Syria is part of Mesopotamia, Iraq part of Mesopotamia, Israel's all sort of off to the side there, but it's very Mesopotamian adjacent, and also right next to Egypt.
Yeah.
And so I think the monotheism came from an Egyptian melding with monotheism. I'm not sure which way it was going necessarily.
Were the Sumerians monotheistic?
No, they were worshiping Shamash, but
Shamash wasn't the only god,
right? And so some of the later names for Shamash were things like Baal.
Really?
So the golden calf.
Yeah.
One version of the golden calf is Baal. Another version of the golden calf is Hathor, and they're probably both right. They're probably a melding of these ideas that happened as these people were going back and forth.
Is that at all connected to Val?
Maybe.
It is a thing to do.
But if you knew about Baal as a
it would immediately
as an idol, yes, and you're feeding an idol, yeah. So the golden calf was this same kind of bull deity, and it was related to storm gods and sun gods and all of these things, sort of becoming a proto-monotheistic god with the sheep herd people.
But all of this coming from the Sumerian.
Well, a lot of it coming from.
Yeah.
So after they left Egypt, then they made became Jewish at some point after that, and actually had a kingdom in Jerusalem, and then was conquered by Babylon because they refused to pay the taxes. And Babylon came and took the king and the family and all of the followers back to Babylon. That was the Babylonian captivity. So it was a second slavery. And so there was a whole second period of this stuff coming in. And so this is where we get our flying angel stuff. Our angels are probably also related to Lamasus and these flying winged things. There are also half human, half bird things with 4 wings. These are Babylonian, but were previously Sumerian. So you get a sort of idea of Sumerian ideas heading into Egypt and then back again into Babylon and back and forth and then leaving Babylon and then back to Israel and bringing these things sort of sloshing back and forth across the Middle East.
Yeah.
No wonder everyone's fighting all the time. But you also get the sense of not just fighting but traveling ideas and a melding of ideas in a way that's really fantastic when you start to try and understand what's happening.
How many people died?
When you ignore how many people died,
battle, yes.
and the idea of the Bronze Age collapse at the end of it all, when suddenly the tin was.
We have discussed the Bronze Age collapse in the past. Remind me, the Bronze Age collapse.
For whatever reason, ancient Greeks, there were pirate people in the Mediterranean who stopped the trade of tin, and you can't make bronze without tin.
Right.
And so you need a little bit of tin to make your bronze, and bronze works so much better than just copper. Copper just bends, but bronze is something you can make a sword out of, or a point of an arrow. And I think there was a sea people is how the Egyptians described it. Now, some people say that there was a tribal group inland up by Asia Minor, but I don't know how they were a sea people up by Asia Minor. Maybe they were originally coming down and mixing with some of these other people in Asia Minor, but I really think that the Iliad and the Odyssey is the story of the sea people raiding from island to island, burning cities to the ground, and destroying the Bronze Age civilizations. So only Egypt survived, and only then barely. They went through a whole new dynasty. But all of the other great civilizations disappeared and were crushed. The Hittites were crushed. All of them went down.
And it was because of the sea people?
It was because of some sort of piratical group out of Mediterranean, and Greeks are my number one suspect.
Wow. ended all forward motion for humanity.
For like writing was lost for like 150 years.
Unbelievable.
I know. The Mycenaean civilization gone completely. Crete, all that.
The only reason I know of the Hittites is from video games.
Yeah. No, the Minoans also, as I said, gone. But so this was an amazing period of history. People were getting lapis lazuli and tin from Afghanistan to the Middle East. There may have even been tin being mined in Wales and coming down. I mean, it was amazing with the huge trade networks that were being developed at the same time as essentially it's still a Stone Age technology if you're not in the cities using bronze, which is only a few people.
It's amazing.
It was amazing, yeah, and when the Sumerian civilization collapsed, it was replaced by the Babylonians. And so we knew about the Babylonians. The words we had were Babylonian words, essentially, Nebuchadnezzar, that sort of thing. And when we trace things back, they knew about the Babylonian captivity. They knew because that was in the Bible. And so we knew about these things from biblical history. But then it turned out there was a whole nother 2,000 years of civilization before all that. And so that was really where everything came from. And so
actual civilization that could record itself.
That wrote stuff down, and instead of just having a circle of stones on a hilltop where you carve some animals, actually had regulated religions with priests who created money, essentially. So, money is really interesting. So I always thought of it was bartering, like you'd have to carry your goat and then you'd trade it for a pile of bricks. But you'd have one goat written on a thing, and there was like official relationships, so that one goat would get you this many bricks, would get you this.
Debt came first.
Well, not so much the debt as the trading back and forth of these things written, but it was too hard for anyone to know the currency exchanges between goats and brick and clay. So things started to get denominated in fewer and fewer pieces that you would then write on stuff, and so it turned like at the end of sort of mid. Early dynasty Sumer, the first 500 years they're figuring this out, they get to people wearing bracelets of silver, and you could just cut off a piece of the silver, and that was a piece of money by weight. And the kings would standardize the weights. And they would inherit like stones that were a particular weight, and this was the official weight. And if you messed up with this, off with your head. They were very strict about that. And then the other thing was bushels of, I think it was millet, bushels of grain were a specific standardized denomination as weighed by duck weights. And so you'd have one duck or a big duck, medium duck, small duck worth of grain, and that was an official amount. And then what would happen is people would sell themselves into slavery in exchange for food for their family in terms of grain. So now they had debt, and there were people trying to get debt to then force people into slavery. And so then they made regulations. You could only sell yourself for 5 years. And if you wanted a better deal, you would go to the temple. And so the temple were the better moneylenders because they were offering better deals and less chance of sending you into slavery. They'd let you pay it off over a longer period of time with less interest rates. And they became essentially the banks. And so they were taking in people's debt. They were taking in the grain. They were storing it. So they were a storehouse of grain to distribute during a bad time. But they did it in terms of, we will sell you the land, and you will give us the grain in exchange for having bought the land. You borrowed the money from us to buy the land. Now you owe us a certain amount of grain. You're bringing it back to the temple, and we'll store it in the temple. And so this became, a separate source of power from the king, who had his own system of taxes and storing grain in his own, palace.
And then there also had to be a point where you had paid off your debt, and now you put your grain in the storehouse anyway, and now it becomes a balance in your favor.
Something like this. Yeah, basically they were inventing banking. This is why is why when Jesus was destroying the money changers in the temple, that's what temples were for.
Right.
That's what they were doing. That's where you changed your money. That was the point.
That's where you made it.
That's where money happened. Yeah, right. It was the bank.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just a completely different understanding than what happens now.
Well, I mean, we still make temples out of our banks. If you go to any of the early 20th century banks where they're all marble columns. And you'll see some pictures of eagles too. I mean, spread winged, just like Shamash.
So this concept of shamash and the light that is carried between basically all the religions that we know of that exist have some form of this.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, Ra is very similar to that. The disc of Ra is the sun carried by the two snakes, but sometimes you see it carried by the eagle or the hawk, and you see the.
So you're saying that the one civilization that seems to have fed to most of what we know today was also completely lost for a significant period of time.
Rediscovered in the late 19th century, exactly, yeah. Yeah. No, I'm finding it fascinating, but I just had to come talk about it because it was the latest shiny thing I had seen.
Why is this on your mind?
It's on my mind because I've been looking at what looks like Sumerian artifacts on the market out there, and I've been trying to actually make a record of them, which we'll have to talk about later.
Legitimate Sumerian artifacts,
or Sumerian adjacent. Yes, they're enough different than the, say, palace works out of Ur that they look like they could be separated in by either time or geography. But you're talking about 2,500 years of time in geography and a lot of different places. You know, if you've got southern Sumer, but you could have things up by the Turkish border. There's a city right on the Syrian-Turkish border where the main citadel is under Turkish control, but just on the other side, it's all Syrian, no man's land, free for all, holes being dug everywhere. It could easily be that area. I was just going over it with Google Earth, and there's major city right there on the river. I can't remember which one, Tigris or Euphrates. And then there's a no man's land that Turkey has acquired of 30 miles between the two on the border. And if you go over it carefully with Google Earth, you can just see there's an ancient city right there in this no man's land. So right next to a hugely populated group of people who don't have a lot of money, there is a huge archaeological site with no oversight. So that was one hypothesis of what might be going on.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, well, I can't wait to hear what comes of this.
Indeed.
This new branch of study you're
As I said, I always love the next shiny thing.
Right. Well, Happy New Year, folks. Thanks for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to Mind Body Evolution with Dr. Josh Stout and Eric Burkell. Go to mindbodyevolution.info for more.